Ken Burns and Lynn Novick's 10-part, 18-hour documentary series, The Vietnam War, starts on Sunday night, September 17th, beginning at 7 o'clock right here on this channel. Now, the line panelists are here with me to talk about why it's important to tell this story now, Mark Boitano. When you think about the war, it's now 40 years on, and we have never really, as a country, come to grips with lots and lots and lots of it, if you really think about it. It's just a scab that's just been ripped open and has never really healed. In your view, we're of a certain vintage here at this table. Right. Are you ready to put this thing to bed in your own personal mind by having something like this and having a Ken Burns take on it? Is it good for the country? Is the timing good?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've just deeply enjoyed everything Burns has done, Roosevelt, Civil War, all that. And I think there's a lot of untold stories about the Vietnam War. I mean, we have a population of 5,000 to 7,000 Southeast Asians in Albuquerque.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yep.
You talk to many of those. I know people that were imprisoned in Vietnam during the war, and they escaped and they came here and they built a life here. So I mean, to hear their stories, my guess is there's maybe going to be a little bit of that in there. Right. But you know, the interesting thing about the war was just the backdrop of this new generation and the Cultural Revolution, right? And the fact that first war in history that was exposed to television. That's right. We had this empowered generation, right, that were the kids of World War II families. You know, they had their nose to the grindstone, they worked hard, they were educated, they were empowered, they had this medium of TV. And just that whole cultural phenomenon that was occurring that gave rise to a lot of the things that affect us today. I mean, ecology, you know, Whole Foods, yoga, meditation, great classic rock music. That's right. So I think there's a lot to learn about the Vietnam War, a lot of untold lessons, and I haven't seen the show, but I'm excited.
You're right on it, though. You're right on. I have seen the full 18 hours. It's actually tremendous. I know it's an amazing thing to watch. I think it's his triumph, honestly, Ken Burns' best work ever. And one of the things that the senator just mentioned, I want to pick up on too, we lost our innocence in this country because of Vietnam as well, and specifically how politicians communicate with us as people, whether they're telling the truth or they're telling a massive lie. And once the massive lie, particularly the Johnson administration, came to light, Americans weren't having it. We changed almost overnight, didn't we? It was an amazing thing, and that goes on to this day, I think, that cynicism towards government that Vietnam kicked off. It's very interesting when you think about it. Yeah.
Well, especially when you compare it to today, when we have an administration that they're counting, you know, 5 or 6 lies a day, and now it's almost you don't care.
That's right.
And what I think about when I think about Vietnam is that it was one of the first wars that people tried so hard not to go to. I mean, there were people in the Civil War who didn't want to go and paid for other people to go to.
Right.
But you had the protests. You didn't have mass support for what was going on.
That's right.
And now today you have Afghanistan. It's our world, you know, the longest war we've ever had. No end in sight, no purpose to being there that we can tell. Right. And it's almost as if it's happening to other people. That's the disengagement from service in the military and protecting the country, to me, is just bizarre. You know, I was a little girl in Las Vegas, and I came from people who volunteered for Vietnam, who didn't protest it. And I remember watching my cousins go, watching them come back and people be mean to them. And now we have Afghanistan, and it's people who either are very patriotic or don't have any other way to support themselves.
That's right.
And that's not the way to defend a country.
That's right. I agree
so
with
hopefully this show will make us start talking about our military and how we're letting poor people do the work for us in a way that's not okay.
I appreciate that point a lot, because it turns out, Tom, we generally know it was a black and brown war back in Vietnam. We generally know that. But when you see in this documentary what happened to these guys actually, and I appreciate the mean-spiritedness when these guys came home, it breaks your heart that there were uniformed men and women at the airport ditching their uniforms in trash cans in bathrooms at the airport because it was just so horrific for them to walk out of the airport in uniform. It just absolutely breaks your heart. But it gives a sense of how fractured we were as a country. We really were quite broken during that period. And here we are now, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there are many different aspects, and I enjoy hearing the different perspectives. Look forward to actually seeing the 18 hours. Right. When you look at what is happening today, I think one of the things that we can learn from the Vietnam War, and specifically from the Ken Burns documentary, is basically understanding and perspective.
Right.
Those are two things that are really lacking in our society today because we're so easy to go, oh, of course, well, that's, everybody's an expert because they read something on, on Facebook or they saw something on YouTube.
Right.
And this is why I'm looking forward to this is because it will remind me what was going on. Everything from, the draft. And just the the mess that was going in, and then coming home, the mess that ensued. And I think that we can learn quite a bit. And I hope that as a result, the folks who watch this, I think, are already going to have a certain perspective and understanding.
That's right.
But we need to broaden that.
What's interesting is that last bit you just said is interesting to me, Senator. When I mentioned this, because Ken Burns himself in interviews was shocked at his own ignorance about Vietnam when he started getting into this and realized he knew absolutely nothing. I had the same exact experience watching it because literally every 10 minutes I was saying out loud on my couch, I had no idea. Do you know what I mean? It just kept going like that over and over and over. And I think that's where the power can be for younger people when they try to assess why Vietnam's still important in our culture. I would recommend this highly for younger people. What's your sense of that as well?
Yeah, no, it's always good to take a hard look at history. A couple of other things too. I remember, I mean, think about racism in America and the fact that, Vietnam, Korea, World War II against the Japanese, and just the World War II generation, my parents' generation, and their view of Asians and so forth, and how the wars we were engaged in impacted.
It was the other side of the world at one time.
Impacted.
Nobody knew a thing about them. It's amazing. Yeah.
And I remember, I told you, we used to organize things. I remember we did this Desert Storm Support 1991 with John and the Beat and KOB, Civic Plaza, thousands of people.
I remember that.
I had so many vets come up to me in tears and say, you know what, I feel redeemed because when I came back from Vietnam, like you said, tomatoes were thrown at me and people didn't understand my story. But, we tried to celebrate not only Desert Storm, but the Vietnam War at that time as well. So there was a lot of healing that occurred. And so many different, like you say, it was a cultural phenomenon. One of the first times in modern history where a president decided not to run again. I mean, can you, an incumbent president saying, listen, I don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole?
Right.
Yeah, so, exciting subject material, right?
Yes, exactly right. It's really quite something. And Tom, again, the lessons learned for us going forward. I appreciated Inez's point about the draft. I was a freshman or maybe a sophomore in high school when the draft ended, but close enough. Do you know what I mean? Where it was like watching this thing come at you.
Yeah.
We had a good discussion that night at the Lensic. We screened a preview of the film where a lot of folks wanted to talk about the idea of a draft again. And that is it viable for both men and women of draft age to be, and would the country accept that kind of a thing if we had to go back? Very vigorous discussion about that afterwards. Yeah.
Well,
so.
yeah, I can't fathom something like that. I mean, talking about division in the country, that would be a flashpoint. I think definitely. Right. And I hope one of the other takeaways from this is appreciation for those who serve.
Yes.
One of the things, and I remember that event, Senator, I remember covering it when I was over at Channel 7, and you're right, it was a healing event, a really, salient event for New Mexico. And I think that, in the talk of Afghanistan, the talk of Vietnam, in the talk of world conflicts, I think we tend to, think more of the policy decision than those people who are really there to enforce the policy as far as our armed forces. And I think that we don't show them enough support, and we need to. Good
point there. I really appreciate it as a way to wrap this up. Thank you all very much. Sunday night, 7 o'clock. Be there, Ken Burns.